Hello, everyone. It's no secret that one of the most successful and popular TV shows to this day remains Game of Thrones, based on the book series A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. And that's not surprising. The plot twists and political intrigues keep viewers hooked right up until the final episodes. But this raises a natural question. What inspired the author, and are there parallels between the story and real historical events? As it turns out, there are plenty. What may surprise you is that even the wall or Valyrian steel have real-world historical prototypes. But let's start from the beginning. Fans of the show have probably noticed that some scenes are depicted as extremely brutal. But is that approach justified? It's worth pointing out that besides journalism, George R.R. Martin studied history and read many historical novels. When asked about the violence in his works, he often replied that real history was sometimes far worse than anyone could imagine. And if you think about it, his works don't actually contain more violence than similar historical literature. Even William Shakespeare is a great example, since he killed off his characters in various cruel and creative ways. Speaking of real historical events that inspired specific scenes in the series, one of the clearest examples is the so-called Black Dinner of 1440, which became the prototype for the infamous Red Wedding. This event took place in Edinburgh, Scotland. At the time, the throne was held by a 10-year-old boy, James II, who was too young to rule the country on his own. Naturally, there was a hidden power struggle between his regents and the powerful Douglas clan, whose lands and armies were nearly equal to the king's authority. After the death of Archibald Douglas, the title passed to his 16-year-old son William, who immediately became the target of political intrigue. In an effort to crush the Douglas clan and consolidate power, the king's regents invited William and his younger brother to a feast at Edinburgh Castle. At first, it looked like a gesture of respect, but during the banquet, a covered dish was placed in front of William, and when the lid was lifted, it revealed the head of a black bull, which at the time symbolized death. The dinner ended with both young Douglases being dragged into the courtyard and executed. The parallels to the Red Wedding are obvious, especially the detail of presenting the direwolf's head. Another major historical influence on the series was the War of the Roses, which began in 1455 between the houses of Lancaster and York, both of whom claimed the throne of England. This long conflict nearly wiped out the existing aristocracy of the time. In an interview, George R.R. Martin admitted that this war heavily inspired A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not hard to guess. The Starks are essentially modeled after the Yorks, and the Lannisters after the Lancasters. Of course, it's not surprising that a historical fantasy series like Game of Thrones includes many parallels to real history. But at the same time, we can't underestimate George R.R. Martin's creative talent. While kings and conquerors acted with politics and survival in mind, Martin reshaped history with a writer's touch, crafting plot twists designed to captivate readers. But what about the magical elements of the story? Could they also have historical counterparts? Surprisingly, yes. For example, Valyrian steel, the rare, nearly indestructible metal used to forge legendary swords like Ned Stark's, was inspired by Damascus steel. Weapons made from Damascus steel were famous as early as the Roman Empire. Not only were they incredibly strong, but their distinctive patterns gave them a mesmerizing appearance. In the series, Valyrian steel is essentially Damascus steel, imagined as being forged with dragonfire. The Wall of the Night's Watch also has a clear, real-world prototype, Hadrian's Wall. George R.R. Martin visited its remains in 1981. Back in the 2nd century, the Roman Empire was one of the largest and most powerful states in the world. It controlled much of Europe and the southern half of Britain. But relations with the northern tribes, the Picts, were hostile. They had no centralized government and lived in scattered clans, refusing to accept Roman authority. To keep them out, Emperor Hadrian decided to build a massive barrier across the island. The wall stretched 117 kilometers, 73 miles, and stood 4 to 6 meters, 13 to 20 feet high. But over time, it was neglected, breached repeatedly, and eventually abandoned by the Romans around 385 AD. Another striking example is wildfire. At first glance, it seems like pure fantasy magic, but there is a real historical equivalent, Greek fire. Invented in 673 AD, this highly flammable liquid was used in naval warfare. It was projected from a bronze siphon, roaring as it shot out up to 25 meters. To make things worse, it continued to burn even on water, devastating wooden ships. The Dothraki people also have historical roots. Martin has said they were inspired by a mix of different nomadic cultures. The Mongols, the Huns, and even some Native American tribes influenced their portrayal. Their horseback archery raids are a direct reflection of Mongol military tactics. Other historical parallels include Dorne, modeled after medieval Welsh principalities, and the show's many religious wars, which echo the Crusades. And these are just a few of the countless historical inspirations behind A Song of Ice and Fire. So what do you think about these real-world influences? Which of them surprised you the most? And should writers rely this heavily on history when creating fantasy worlds? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.